Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing my November reading wrap-up. In the month of November, I read 3 books, which, from a numbers perspective, I'm not super happy with. And I think that's also partially because, I just know for a fact that I read less, or I spent less time reading in the month of November. A lot of times I don't pay super close attention to the number of books that I finish in a month, but it's really the amount of time that I've spent reading in a month that I pay attention to and how I gauge if it was a good or bad reading month, and also my reactions to the books and things like that. And this one was pretty mid. Didn't spend a lot of time reading. The things I did read, I did overall enjoy, but yeah, just wish I could have done more of it, but I am at peak capacity, and so finding the time and energy to read has been difficult lately. I just talked about this in my last video, and so I'm not going to go into it again. But yeah, I'm here to talk about the 3 books that I read in November. Since there's only 3, I'm going to actually go through them from least favorite to favorite, which other people do. Usually I don't do this because it's hard for me to rank books, but since there's only 3, I have very clear distinctions with this one. Not very clear, but it's very easy for me to know what my least favorite to favorite was this month. So first I have The Next Great Migration by Sonia Shah, and the subtitle to this is The Beauty and Terror of Life on the Move. This was one of the books that I had on my nonfiction November TBR. This is a book that while I was reading it, in general, I was enjoying the content and things like that. It's well written, stuff like that. I just feel like what this book was and what it was doing is different than what I thought it was going to be doing. I thought that this book would be leaning more on nature side of things and plants and animals and things like that, and how those things have sort of migrated around the world, and there would also be humans involved in that as well. But it's really more about the humans than anything else. There is some talk of plants and animals in here, but 75 to 80% of this book is about humans and humans migrating, immigrating, things like that. It also talks about different policies that have taken place over the course of various countries' histories. A lot of this seems to be a reaction to anti-immigration related laws and perspectives and things along those lines. While I find those things interesting, that wasn't necessarily what I wanted out of this book, and a lot of it is also stuff that I've read in other books, and this is just one of those things where it's I've just read other books on immigration and things like that, and especially immigration and immigration policies in the United States. And so the information that it was providing for me here was not brand new information for me, and so I was just kind of disappointed when I got to the end of the book, because I was just oh, this book had a purpose and it achieved that purpose, but that's not what it feels like the book is pitched as, which is always such a weird disconnect. I also try to go into books relatively blind. The way that I thought this book was going to be structured, I thought it'd be more heavy on the science side of things as opposed to social sciences. Again, I think the writing in here is really strong. The research is really strong. Overall, it's a well-constructed book. And so I would be interested in reading more from this author in the future. It's just that what this book was accomplishing is not what I wanted out of this book, which is one of those things where it's hard for me to fault the book for this, but also at the same time, I'm left feeling a little bit disappointed by this book. Again, there's a lot of pros to it. I think if you want to learn about the history of migrations of people and immigration around the world, then this would be a good book to pick up. It's extremely readable. It's extremely engaging. Sonia Shah is a journalist, and so I feel nonfiction books written by journalists are often good for people who don't read a lot of nonfiction because they write in a way that's really accessible. So I feel if that's a topic that you're interested in, then this is worth picking up. It's just not the book that I was expecting when I went into it, which is a little bit disappointing and why it's number 3 on my list. The second book that I am going to talk about is These Truths, A History of the United States by Jill Lepore. This is another book that I read for Nonfiction November, and it's also the book that we read in November for the Chunky Chapter Book Club. But I will say overall, I enjoyed this book. I think I'm basically the target audience for this book. I am someone who really enjoys reading about United States history. I enjoy historical nonfiction books. I enjoy biographies of important people over the course of the United States and things like that. And so I always knew, or I had very strong feelings that this was going to be a book that I would enjoy. I will say, if you ever wanted to pick this up, the audiobook for this is really, really fantastic. And so I think that was a really fantastic way to engage with this text. In the beginning of the book, I was really engaged with the story, and I was kind of wondering how it was going to play out as it went farther into the book. I will say, like, the closer we came to the present, it felt like the less, like, detailed the deep dives got. So basically what Jill Lepore is trying to do is look at the narrative of the United States and its history and trying to provide different perspectives, different people who are often erased from these narratives, all of those different things into those stories. And so she talks a lot about women and people of color, Native Americans, people who were enslaved, things like that, how things were playing out for them during these big moments in US history. And so Jill Lepore is basically trying to provide either an alternate history or alternate views to the United States and its history and things like that. And kind of like talking about this big ideal that we have in the United States about freedom and equality and what that's actually looked like for the majority of the people in the United States. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this book a lot. I will say, again, as it got closer to the present, you started to lose some of the depth into the stories and things like that. And I don't know if that's because of like time and energy, or if it's just because like as you get closer to the present, there's a lot more like resources that people have available to them. So like if I wanted to learn more about Nixon and Watergate and things like that, like there are lots of other places I can go to do those things, whereas like things from like the 1800s might be a little bit harder. But like you can see, like if you count like the number of pages devoted to like a number of years, it's kind of insane because like the first part is the first like 50 years, quote unquote, of American history. And then the next part is like another 50 years. And then the last two parts are like 100 years. And it's like, those are significant time jumps. And there's a lot that happens over the course of those time periods and things like that. And so like you definitely feel the difference within each section. So yeah, overall really enjoyed this book. It didn't quite live up to my expectations because of those reasons, but it's still like a 4-star read for me. Like I'm really glad I finally got a chance to read this, and I'm very excited to talk about it with everyone in the Chunky Chapter Book Club. All right, and the final book that I have to talk about today is Queen of the Tiles by Hanna Alkaf. This is a young adult thriller, I suppose. And I really enjoyed my time reading this book. I read the whole thing in basically like a day, and it was just a really fun time. This is a book that I picked up completely on a whim. I saw it on my library's website, and I was like, this seems fun. And so I read it, enjoyed myself. In this story, you are following this character named Najwa, whose best friend died while at a Scrabble tournament. So the story begins with like this really intense scene at a Scrabble tournament. This girl, Trina, basically dies at the Scrabble table. And so there's this whole like big thing about like what actually happened. There's no real answers as to like what happened to her, like what caused her death or anything along those lines. So fast forward a year and it's the annual Scrabble tournament again. And so Najwa is back, and Trina was considered the queen of the tile. She was the best. She was probably going to win the competition. Najwa returns to the competition partially to become the queen of the tiles herself in order to sort of stop anyone else from taking the title from her best friend, and partially to kind of like process and figure out what exactly happened a year ago. And in the middle of this competition, which takes place over the course of a weekend, someone starts posting on Trina's Instagram account again. Now Najwa is trying to figure out like who is doing this and who is behind her death and all of these different things. So this book is basically being pitched as like Pretty Little Liars meets Queen's Gambit, but not quite Queen's Gambit, because obviously Queen's Gambit was about chess and this is about a Scrabble competition. But this is like a really fun thriller mystery young adult book. It's a little bit dramatic, it's a little bit over the top, but as long as you know that going into it and you want something that's just kind of like a fun romp, I recommend this. There were multiple times in the story where I thought I knew what was going to happen, and then I was surprised by the ending. There's a lot in here about just like grief and processing and things along those lines. I will say like what ends up happening in the end, I kind of saw coming to a certain degree, but I wasn't like quite sure if that's the direction it was going to go in. The author does a really good job of being in Najwa's like point of view and things like that as she's grieving. She's been going to a therapist because she has like missing memories from that day and things like that, and like she's trying to like process her feelings and kind of get back to a thing that she loved. It deals a lot with like complicated people and complicated friendships and complicated relationships and competitiveness and things like that. Overall, I just think of it as like kind of a fun mystery thriller. If you're someone who enjoys young adult mysteries, I think this is one worth putting on your list. It also takes place in Malaysia, which I didn't know going into. It also incorporates the Scrabble elements really well. Like the main character is very clearly in the Scrabble world. Like I don't know if the author just knows a lot about Scrabble and Scrabble competitions, if she loves Scrabble herself, like what it is, but she, like, at least to me as someone who's not a competitive Scrabble player, it felt like a very realistic portrayal of like the way Scrabble players think and things like that. So I just found that aspect to be really fun as well. So yeah, if you like the idea of a mix of Pretty Little Liars and The Queen's Gambit, but with Scrabble instead of chess, this is worth picking up. It's a really, really fun read. So yeah, that's everything I have for this video. Let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of the books I talked about here today, or let me know if you participated in Nonfiction November, how it went for you. In case you missed it, I did do an end of year TBR where I talk a little bit about how I plan to spend my December in terms of my reading, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.